So Kent, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast, Psyche. I'm so excited to spend this hour or so with you, just getting to know you and learning more about your story. Um, I guess before
Yeah,
we
thank
be
you.
Yeah,
hmm
absolutely. Before we begin, would you mind just kind of telling the listeners a little bit about yourself and kind of what you're up to? I know there's some people who know you and love your work that listen to this podcast, others who may not know you. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, appreciate you having me.
Of course.
Yeah, maybe just a quick intro. I live in Michigan currently, and I'm married and have three kids, and we're about to make a big life transition and move to Georgia. That's where my wife is from. So we're kind of in the middle of a major life change, and um, that comes with its own possibilities and unknowns. So that's kind of what's happening currently. And I don't know, I've done a bunch of different professional things. I used to be a worship leader ages ago. I studied in Israel. That's where I did all my graduate work. So I got really into biblical studies. I've been a mega church pastor for a while. Lately, I've been teaching at a place called C3. It's more of a spiritual community. There's not a central doctrine statement or anything.
Okay.
uh, Kind of a home for like spiritual but not religious. That's not a phrase I love, but it's a good enough phrase.
Yeah,
To,
I like it, but then I'm conflicted about it too.
yeah, same. But it has that at least gives you a sense of vibe. Yeah, and I've been doing some training at a place called Animas Valley Institute for the last 7 or 8 years. This is guide training and nature based soul work is what we refer to it as, and so that's really kind of right at the heart of things I'm interested in. And I've written a book and a study Bible and have a podcast, and so I juggle a few things.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I really love about you and just appreciate about your work is, and I know this is my perspective now, it's not easy to put you in a box because of your various experiences. And I think the various different sources that you bring into how you articulate stuff. And I find myself being the same way, maybe not at your level. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, because I wanted to introduce you to people, because you do have so many interesting ideas from different perspectives. And yeah, I don't think you're easily describable. And I like that about you.
Yeah, thanks. Even my kids don't know what to say. Like, what's your
Okay.
dad do? They're like, we don't really know. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Okay, so here's kind of where I wanted to start. And obviously, I did some homework and I've been listening to your podcast for a long time. In fact, one of my favorite things you've ever done was actually an interview with Pete Holmes, where you got into some of this autobiographical stuff, which I want to ask you about. Um, but I guess to build on this idea of the spiritual but not religious, one of the ideas in that movement, which is definitely not monolithic by any means, is this idea of transcending but including. And I don't know that I fully am going to use it in the right way or the way that it was intended, but I know that you come from kind of a conservative evangelical background.
hmm
And I'm curious now in 2023, when you look back on where you came from, are there some things that you definitely have transcended that you don't identify with anymore? And then I'm curious if you could talk about any of the things from that, you know, theological past, that kind of cultural background that you've included that
hmm
still maybe are a part of who you are, even if it's shifted some.
Yeah, that's a really hard question. And in fact, I do like to talk about transcend and include. I don't like to say how I'm doing that because it's hard. It's hard to understand it as a concept anyway. I think it really comes from Evelyn Underhill. She wrote this book, famous book on mysticism,
Mm,
and she uses that phrase a lot. And then I'm pretty sure that's where Ken Wilber picked it up, and that's
okay.
where I first got it. So, and just to understand the concept generally, it's like, okay, one measure of growth is that you transcend your original frame. It's the only frame by any rubric here, by any frame, by any model.
Sure.
There's an experience of transcending that original starting place, and but the difference is the capacity to include some dimensions of what you previously just left is really a measure of maturity.
Mm,
And it gets a little technical, like we don't need to get into like spiral dynamics or things like that, or other models for consciousness. But it does seem that kind of earlier stages of consciousness have a hard time transcending and including. They just transcend and exclude.
mm.
That's like, I've moved beyond and now I hate whatever I just was 5 minutes ago. And that's actually kind of normal. That's the first thing I like to say about it. That's what we all do. When I left evangelicalism, it was like, well, I'm not that for sure. I'm not that. I'm not a fundamentalist. And which I can say in kind of a fundamentalist dogmatic way, which means I haven't really gone all that far.
Got you.
It's like
Yeah.
every atheist is just a fundamentalist in disguise. I'm exaggerating. It's not really true, but it's like, anyway, so I think one of the markers of some maturity is that there's a kind of an inclusion of the depth dimension of
Mm,
what raised you or what brought you this far. And so I could take the Bible, for example. I've gone through, it's like a bad dating relationship. So for me, it's like on again, off again, on again, off again, and then off forever. Like I'm done. That's it. When I stopped being a pastor, I had an expensive library that I
mm,
had charged the church to collect. And also I had been collecting in graduate school, huge, like, I don't know, I'm making up a number, but let's say $200. And these books did not suck. They were good ones. And I sold the entire thing. I was like, I'm done. I'm not going to look at these again. I sold the whole, all in one shot.
mm.
And about a year later, I tried to buy back 5 of them from the person I sold to. And it's not because I was including, it's just, I just started to realize, oh, this material represents a certain shape. It shaped me in a certain way, and I don't
Mm,
have to be against it. And maybe I could say one more thing. I was always interested in the Bible from a literary point of view, not just a theological point of view. Like I didn't go to
okay.
seminary. I was an English major, and then when I went to graduate school, I did go for biblical studies and comparative religion, but that's very different than seminary, than
Sure.
theological studies. And I was interested in the stories and the structure and the metaphors and the symbols, and that never left. And even though I'm not dogmatic in my particular views about the Bible, I see tremendous value in it, and I see more truth in certain dimensions of it now than when I was sort of more of a believer, I guess you would say, or was inside a certain mold. So I don't know. I know that didn't really. I'm just kind of dancing around the question a little bit.
I'm perfectly fine with that. No, that was a beautiful answer. I guess one of the things that comes up in light of that was, can you speak to how you find the Bible now? Maybe this is my language. It's more energizing, more or in touch with your psyche than you did when you were quote unquote, a more traditional believer.
Well, it's more like, it's not like I'm sitting down and reading the Bible, to be honest. It's just
Sure.
that,
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I cracked it open.
yeah. Well, like if I have to look something up, I'll be like, wait a minute, what was that thing again? It's more that the stories are alive.
Mm,
I think they live in the collective field anyway. They live in the collective unconscious,
mm,
and maybe there's even an archetypal layer even beneath these stories, which I think there are. Like Adam and Eve, or Jacob and Esau, and these are rival brothers, and that's an archetype, and so it has a kind of living power to it. And so it's more like they return to me, like the truth that's hidden in plain sight, just as I'm like bumping into problems and issues and questions in my own life. It's like, wait a minute, I recognize this. And the Bible is trying to communicate um, a, a, a version of truth that transcends even the limitations of language and religion and um, um, denominational opinions.
sure.
The story transcends that stuff, and it'll just ring true all of a sudden. I'll be like, oh, that's it. It's like that story. And I'll give you just kind of a somewhat silly example. When I left um, my job as a pastor, I felt like it was the beginning of a faith journey, though it seemed like from everyone else's perspective, it was the ending of a faith journey.
Mm,
But part of what inspired me was even the story of Abraham. It says, leave your family, leave your country, and leave your people. Those are three major identity markers for people. And I felt like in some sense, I had never done that. I mean,
mm.
I'd moved to Jerusalem and did some like dramatic things, but really left home base and gone toward the unknown? No, not really. And that's what it felt like to me. It's like now I'm setting off and I really don't know where I'm going. And I was like, and this is just like the stories that I've heard since I was a kid, that's what I mean.
Dude, that's awesome. I mean, one of the things that's coming up is I've often told people that on my like therapy journey, I did therapy with like a Jungian psychotherapist, and I remember just one session. I don't remember the details of it, but I know that we basically just read, and he was not a Christian at the time. I was having all that deconstructed, but we read the Cain and Abel story in Genesis, and just kind of understood it from like this depth psychological perspective. And it was the best fucking therapy session I've ever had. I learned more about psychology and my psyche and just the human person than any other psychology class I've ever taken in grad school,
Yeah.
preparing to be a therapist. It was incredible. Like, we weren't
Yeah.
looking at it literally or even necessarily historically, but just in terms of the human psyche.
Mhm.
And it just blew me away.
Exactly. Exactly. That's what it's like. Yep. Yep. I think that's transcend and include, like a certain softening happens. Like to transcend something is eye-opening, but it's also it's a bit frightening because you're
Mm,
in a brave new world. And when the heart is softened to a certain extent, I think the subtleties like you're describing can come in. It's like, oh, I can look at the story again, and I had no idea what was here. I had no idea what was here. And until you start to see it, like you're saying, inside your own psyche. Cain and
yeah.
Abel live in the psyche.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Now, going back to this idea or this movement, I guess there's different ways to look at it, of the spiritual but not religious. You said that maybe there's parts of that that resonate with you, parts of it that don't. Could you speak to both of those sides?
Yeah, sure. I initially resonated with it. I bumped into that phrase a long time ago, taking one of those like Pew Forum
Oh yeah,
tests.
like the
Like,
nuns and
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
And I was like, oh, this is my box. I'm the nun, even though at the time I was like working at a Christian school, it's the maybe it's a bit of a Gen X thing. I don't like to necessarily think I don't know about those divisions anyway, but it's
sure.
like I don't like checking a box that I'm in this particular camp. It makes me uncomfortable. And so that's a dimension, but I also thought, yeah, I'm not interested in propping up um the traditional religious structures
Mm.
or needing to tear them down. Sometimes I feel like tearing them down or or defend them or promote them really. So um yeah, and so I think spiritual but not religious, it's good in that sense. It's describing almost a mood more than
Mm.
a stance. It's like a mood, like, yeah, I'm a bit suspicious of organized religion, and for good reason. Like who I think if you're not suspicious of organized religion, you're just kind of in denial. Like even the individual church, you look behind the curtain, you go to some whatever, your local church, you look behind the curtain, it's going to make you uncomfortable. It's like, oh, I see. There's little power struggles and the egos involved and all this kind of stuff. And okay,
Absolutely.
so I think spiritual but not religious is just kind of suspicious of institutional modes. Where I don't, and I'll just speak personally rather than culturally,
Okay.
I'm actually religious in in the deepest sense of that word. Like I believe in that inside the mystery of the human psyche or soul or being is a kind of compass
Mm.
that points toward meaning and depth and truth and value and struggle and wants to wrestle with suffering and love. And to me, that's religious. That's like the word means, to rebind. And I think the human condition is like that. We lose our way. Everyone does, no matter what their tradition or lack of tradition. And there's a kind of a longing to come home. And that's, in my view, the religious instinct. And I mean, I got the idea of religious instinct from Jung. He says it's an instinct, and I believe him.
Mm,
And so, in a way, I'm consenting. I'm trying to consent to that instinct, um, to live my life in such a way that it's oriented toward meaning and might be confronted by a larger reality than I can yet see at this time. So that's why I still like the word religious. So that's what, like, spiritual but not religious. I'm like, I don't know, but technically I'm actually religious. Sometimes I'm not that spiritual, to tell you the truth. I'm not like doing a bunch of practices or like
right.
sitting in
I'm not
yoga
either.
meditation for 9 hours or whatever. I'm just not. I could use some help in that sense, but I'm
Mm,
religious in my orientation. And and maybe there's a PS to this, which is, I guess in part it comes from comparative religion. Like, that was
sure.
my field of study for a while. And you do start to see um, patterns, like big patterns that are true for individual humans and groups of humans. And religion does a good job paying attention to what those patterns are, even if they say them differently. And Christianity pays attention to the death and resurrection pattern, and
Mm,
that's like true on the really deep level. Judaism, there's some resurrection themes in Judaism too, but anyway, I don't need to go through a bunch of religions,
sure.
but that's where I say I don't think we should be too quick to dismiss 5,000 years of tradition and storytelling and myth and value structure, that and just because we're sophisticated and modern and secular, I think we should slow down a little bit. That's just my general feeling.
Yeah. Man, Ken, I love that. Now this question is coming up just in light of what you just said, but also just to let everyone know, this morning I kind of re-listened to this episode you have on your great podcast, Hints and Guesses. There is no such thing as God. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it's not too big of a question, and I'm fine if you dance around, because I ultimately have to dance around that question too, or that reality. Do you have a place for God nowadays? What is God? How do you conceptualize that?
Yeah.
I'll be the first to say I don't know. So I'm
Hmm.
okay if you respond that way too, but
Yeah. Well, I guess I wonder what I said in that podcast. That's the first thing I'm thinking right now.
you were drawing heavily from like Thomas Merton
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
Martin Buber.
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, if God is a thing like every other thing, then it's not God. That's the first maybe
Mm,
obvious statement. It's like, to me, God is the word that is beyond things. And I'm speaking, like, I think right now the great mystics of the world religions, and who are the kind of the misfits, they all say something like that. That, I mean, maybe even behind the commandment, make no graven image, is the first hint at that. Like, as soon
mm,
as you have an image, then you're in possession of that, and then you think you know what it is. And so having no graven image is like saying you have to remain, um, with you're walking blind on one level, or one eye is open and one eye is blind forever.
mm,
And and God can't be a thing like your microphone is a thing, or a tree is a thing. Um, Otherwise it's just a thing among things. And so anyway, I was probably just kind of pushing on that. Like, other phrases that come to mind right now, I got this from James Finley. He says no idea of God is God, which is another
mm,
way of saying the same thing. And that God is a name for the nameless. And whatever reality is with a capital R, that's sort of what I mean by God. And to say that I know what reality is just kind of silly. So I'm religious in that sense. And I think God, another name for God is reality. And that remains utterly mysterious. And to me, I would rather walk through life with a posture of wonder, and in a way humility, although I'm not that humble. I just mean, like, um, a fair amount of I don't know seems to be almost like the second part of a faith journey. The first is, well,
Mm.
who are we talking about, and what do I need to know, and what is this God like, and but it seems to be almost without question that the next step in that is that you start to lose grip of that, and you don't know anymore. You don't know anymore, and and you realize your ideas and images of God were projections in a way, or collective assumptions. Not that they're totally wrong, but they're collective assumptions that that dissolve. You walk, it's like you walk to the edge of the beach, and there the vast ocean is. And if the vast ocean is God, I want to, I'd like to go for a swim here. And it means I have to let go of my ideas of what I think I've been walking toward. It's kind of maybe a convoluted metaphor at the moment, but um anyway. And I think one reason why I would make a podcast like There's No Such Thing as God is because I think everyone, including myself, needs to loosen their grip, both if
Mm.
they're agnostics, atheists, or believers. Everyone needs to loosen their grip and calm down a little bit and say, the other name for God is mystery. And you can be a person of faith, meaning you trust something, or you're following a kind of mysterious lead, and also not be too clingy about that,
Oh,
and
man.
something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it lands with me. I think I'm really picking up what you're putting down. I don't know that you would put it this way, but maybe as I'm trying to process everything you just said, I'm thinking maybe the first part of the journey is a type of knowing, and then the latter part is like an unknowing,
Hmm. Yeah.
which I know is a kind of category that has been important to mystics and negative theology and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that comes from the even the book The Cloud of Unknowing.
The cloud of
um
unknowing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, which is funny. It just takes the same image. So like in the Hebrew Bible, Moses goes up on the mountain and he's enveloped in a cloud.
Mm,
And so this becomes the dominant symbol of the book. And he's saying, well, actually, this is what the spiritual life is like. When you're ready, or maybe sometimes when you're not ready, you're enveloped in a cloud of not knowing. And that's a very mysterious thing to leave people with. He's sort of
mm,
saying, unless you're willing to let go of your ideas, images, doctrines, beliefs, ideas, then you'll only go so far. But someday a cloud is likely to descend and envelop you. And people, I think, when they first experience a bit of the cloud, like let's just say an existential cloud, they think, oh, that therefore there is no God. But they might actually just be getting closer to the mystery, closer to being
yeah.
enveloped in maybe a first taste of unknowing. And thankfully, like when I was in graduate school, and what we were doing in part was just like tearing the Bible apart with great joy. That's what graduate school is.
Yes.
Look at this, and bringing in all this historical critical data. But I got lucky in
Mm,
that I had to take some courses around Christian mysticism, and I had also discovered
mm,
Richard Rohr at the same time. So I
okay.
had this like voice always like, slow down here. You don't know what you're talking about. And it's really fun to be critical of the Bible, but maybe there's a mystery present here that you're just a nothing but a beginner. And
Mm,
that really helped me. It helped me not on get on this bandwagon of deconstruction, which is, I know, popular and kind of fun, but tearing down is like, after a while it's like, well, everything's in rubble. So
mm.
what now? And so I don't know, it helped me at least remain partially open.
Yeah. Oh, Ken, I love that. Hey, just as a quick aside,
Mhm.
I've recently developed this online friendship with this guy. His name is Christopher Rodkey. He's a professor and pastor and like public theologian. I want to bring him up because I think it was years ago he was commissioned to do. Sounds a little silly, but like a coloring book for radical theology.
Mm,
And he was telling me that the way he decided to kind of portray quote unquote God in a kind of a radical theology kind of way was as a cloud. And so
mm.
I just
Yeah.
thought that was really neat. I know it's like it can be taken too literally, but I just thought that was a cool way to kind of portray the divine in
Yeah,
kind
it's
of a coloring
beautiful.
book. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, we need more of that. I mean, theology is so serious, but really
Mm,
the imagination. and the muse, we could say,
Oh, I like that.
it's yeah, is what's needed for I don't know, the 21st century. We need a little bit more play when it comes to God and less rigidity, I think.
Sure. So one thing I didn't realize about your story was kind of your background in literature. That's super interesting, and I do wonder if you could speak to the ways that that kind of framework or almost hermeneutic or lens shaped how you thought about like religion and spirituality.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I've never really thought about it before, but yeah, I was an English major in college, and I liked poetry.
Okay.
I liked plays a lot.
Oh, okay.
In fact, there's I went to a Christian Liberty, a Christian school, and they had a literature of the Bible class, and one of the things that they proposed, which is a bit controversial actually, is that Job is like a play. The book of Job is like a play, and it is very much. It reads like a play,
That's
and
super interesting.
yeah, for some reason that just I don't know. It's just my makeup that rung my bell. I'm like, yeah, that's the way I connect with the stories. Like
Mm,
I can hear the poetry of the Bible, even though I'm going to church on Sunday and I'm being told by a pastor what all this stuff means, and
sure.
how I should be moral and do all this stuff. But it's like, okay, fine. But like, I don't know. And the more I got into it, the more kind of magnificent the actual Hebrew Bible is. The New Testament is as well, but it's like, what is it? It's not pure myth. It's not pure history. It's not pure poetry. It's not pure prose. It's
Right.
it's a it's a dancing combination of all these things and all these editorial insertions and the way language is being played with and all these literary allusions. Like I don't know, I it's like I don't know, my background in studying literature, when I finally discovered how the Hebrew Bible was actually how it came together and what the language was actually like, I was like, this is amazing. It's like,
Wow.
why don't I mean, if we talked about the Bible more like a song, I think more people would be interested in what kind of song is the Bible actually playing, or what kind of um, tune is coming out here. And anyway, I don't know if I could say much more about that. It just I don't know. It's just maybe the way I'm wired or something like that.
Mm. Oh, that's awesome, man. Okay, Kent. So I know that, let's say in the last year or so, it seems like you've been following this thread. I don't know exactly how to describe it. Maybe the sacred masculine or just kind of
Mm-hmm.
masculinity in general. You've had some great episodes on your podcast about like the father wound.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is a really big topic. Maybe it's controversial for some. I do a lot of work around this, maybe kind of from a therapeutic perspective. I end up working with a lot of males with a variety of different struggles. I would love to kind of sit at your feet and just kind of hear some of the things that you have to say about like masculinity, the divine masculine, just wherever you want to go with that. I'd be honored to just hear more about that.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Maybe just a little background. I think um, I've never been interested in men's work or men's retreats, or like if someone were like, "Hey, you want to come to a men's Bible study?" I'd be like, "No way in hell am
You're
I
like,
going to a men." Yeah, exactly. Like I'm out of here. Um,
Now, can you say why that was the case? Like why you had kind of that visceral reaction?
I think I think I was like a pretend, and I mean this like seriously. I was like sort of a pretend feminist, you know.
Mm.
I had all these feminist friends in college, and as part of part of studying literature anyway,
Oh, yeah,
it's like,
right. Yeah, you have
yeah,
to be.
yeah. And so it's like, oh yeah, it's fun to tear down the patriarchy and say that the problem are men, and I'm going to be a nice guy. I'm going to
Mm.
be I'm into feelings and poetry and music and art, and I'm actually, I can also be a real asshole. So that's what I mean. It's
Mm.
like kind of a facade, but I don't know. I was pushing away, and I think I was pushing away from, I guess, what people would call the more toxic expressions of masculinity, or
Okay.
how it reveals itself in church leadership and hierarchies, and like the man is on top and this kind of stuff, and I just was in a general sense resistant to that.
Got you.
I don't I think things started to change for me when I read Iron John by Robert Bly. I read that book on a plane to Alaska, and I kept closing the book
Mm,
because I was like, what is this? Like, what is he talking about? And in fact, my feeling was I've never read anything like this in my life.
mm,
And partly, I mean, Bly's an amazing writer, and he kind of like, it's like part poetry, part musing, part riffing and on a myth, and then part mythology. It's like it's a strange book anyway. And but I could feel like deeper than that, that he's speaking to things that I don't know very much about. Like
mm.
he's talking about male initiation on one level, and I'm feeling and thinking, what the hell is that? And I
Yeah.
feel uninitiated. Like, where are the elders? Where are the leaders? Where are the ordeals that we've gone through? Where and a big part of Iron John is, at least at the beginning of the book and of the story, is the discovery of the wild man,
Mm,
and which is in the forest, buried under a lake. And I don't know, this image of like this hairy, green, rusty, mud covered dimension of the masculine. I was like, yes, this is missing from my life, or I've bumped into it from here or there, and I don't know what it wants, and I don't know how to integrate it, to use a fancy word. But like, and
sure.
more than that, I don't even know what it wants, and I don't even know if it's safe, because
Mm.
really, if you start talking on the archetypal level around the masculine, there's a lot of unsafe things here. And
Well said. Yeah.
so I don't know, that changed my life. That book changed my life. I read it probably 5 or 6 times. I started giving it to people, and it wasn't it was sometime later that I personally started using the phrase the sacred masculine, because I
Okay.
kept hearing my friends, particularly at Animus in my guide training, talking about the sacred feminine. And I was like, well, wait a
Mm,
minute, what about the sacred masculine? Like, there's the yin and the yang here, and masculine and feminine. I don't know exactly what your views are. I think are dimensions of every human psyche, but more than that, how it plays out in personality and culture and myths and stories. If we don't start saying that the masculine too is sacred, we're really going to lose the plot here.
yeah.
And we're just going to double down on critiquing what is fairly easy to critique, abuses of power. Yeah, that's easy to critique.
Mm,
But so much so that men don't know what to do. They're like, especially if they're somewhat apologetic, they're like, look, I'm not a part of this toxic culture, so I'll just be quiet, and I'll take a back seat. And but at the same time, I won't find out what's in there. I won't
dude.
find out what's in there. So
And I'm so sorry to interrupt you because you're on a roll, but I just thought you made a brilliant point, maybe a couple episodes ago, where like the contemporary father on TV just gets portrayed as like a bozo or just some kind of bumbling idiot.
exactly.
I thought that was
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah, like Modern Family. Like, I
Modern
actually
Family.
love, yeah, I love Phil and Modern Family, and I act like him sometimes too. But when you step back and say, what do we expect from the father? Well,
Mm,
that's what we expect: a kind of bumbling idiot who's more or less harmless, and sells real estate, makes funny jokes, and okay, fine, that's a TV show. But it's not just a TV show; it's giving us images of what's popular and acceptable. And okay, so here are the dangerous words. Where's the warrior? Where's the wild
mm,
man? Where's the king? Where's the trickster? Now I'm just naming archetypes, and
sure.
these aren't totally just masculine archetypes. There's a feminine dimension to everything I'm mentioning, but I just mean that kind of potent power that rests in the psyche is never accessed. It's like
Mm,
it's or we just cling to one tiny dimension, like the sort of egocentric, um I don't know what you would call it, like success oriented male. We say, okay,
yeah.
that in certain circles, that's we can approve of that, or in certain circles you would diminish that. It doesn't matter. It's still a totally myopic tiny. Where's the sacred in that? who
Mm,
who are you even serving? It's like, I mean, I hate to pick on public figures because they're always a lot more complex, but I remember at I think Trump's inauguration or something, he was playing that Frank Sinatra song, I Did It My Way. And I thought, well, that's exactly the problem.
mm,
And like, where's the service? There's no kingly energy in I Did It My Way. There's no depth dimension there. There's no like, I would lay down my life. That's only one dimension of the king, but I would lay down my life in service of the whole here. That's the ideal. But so anyway, to back up, why am I talking about the sacred masculine? Because men need a lot of help. I need a lot of help. And
Yeah.
and if we're going to look into the black box, because once you look into the black box, you see the darkness and the golden possibilities. You need some help to look in there. You
Yeah.
can't be naive. You can't be naive. There are reasons why there's a major critique around men in general. So we can't be naive here. But using the word sacred, I think, I don't know, it opens up a certain door. It's like,
Mm.
whoa, maybe it's a blessing to not only be a man, but that masculinity can bless the world in a certain way. And yeah, and by the way, women also have access to the masculine. I mean, we can go down that route. I'm not trying to be too segregated with gender
Sure.
here, but
Sure.
anyway.
Yeah. Now, I know I don't know the details. I'm just curious if you could maybe speak a little bit to it, but it's my understanding that you've even led some retreats or you've done some work
Mhm.
with men around some of this. I'm just curious if you're able to share, maybe without giving too much, what that looks like. I mean, what you kind of take them through. Is that
Mhm.
something you could speak to? Like just talking about what a type of retreat with you around men's work would look like?
Yeah, yeah. I've done a couple different things. I've done some online stuff with the myth Iron John,
Okay.
and some of that is well, we're reading the myth and we're talking about it, and we're saying things like, well, what's coming up for you, and then
Gotcha.
we do something called counsel, which is a technique I learned at Animist, really, but it's not, they don't have the corner on this, but it's just going in a circle
Mm,
and in trying to get right to the heart of the matter and really listening, and mirroring back. That's more my role as a guide, but just
okay.
mirroring back and asking some questions, and it creates a sacred container, and really sometimes for the first time, men are saying things that have happened to them, that are
Mm,
currently happening to them, that they've never talked about, and it's just the story, the myth, that is help pulling the stuff out. And so anyway, I've done some work with Iron John a couple different times. There's a book I like a lot by Robert Moore called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover.
yeah, it's a
These
good
are
one.
Yeah, these are so for archetypes of the masculine, and or yeah, that's the way I've used it. And so I've done a whole retreat just dedicated to those four archetypes. And so that would look like practices out in the natural world around cultivating these. So so the way Moore puts these, I'll just choose one here. So the king is an archetype, and every human being, male or female, um, it is affected by this archetypal potency. It's almost like an energy frequency. I don't want to
Mm,
sound too woo woo, but that's what it's like. It's like we know when a king or queen has entered the room. We can feel it. There's a certain power there, and so human beings have more or less access to that. So the king is the positive image, the golden image that, and works kind of like an ideal. And so, um, but it also has a shadow side, which is something like the tyrant or the
mm,
weakling. And many men vacillate between these two things, the tyrant and the weakling. And so a retreat would be an exploration of both of that. So the facet of wholeness of the archetype and some practices around cultivating kingly energy and what that means, and when it's there and when it's not there, and what that might actually ask of you, and then also an exploration of the shadowy sides of that, the weakling and the tyrant. And we can often be just totally gripped by these. They're really sub personalities or complexes. The complex of the weakling, I can do nothing here.
gotcha.
The passivity. What do you want for dinner? What do you want for dinner?
Mm,
Just always deferring. Or the opposite pole, which is the tyrant, which is, damn it, we're having pizza. I don't care what you think. I don't know, it's a dumb example with
sure.
dinner, but
Sure.
um, the king is what's latent. In other words, it's just the mature side of what's immature. And so a lot of men's work for me looks like, let's talk about the immature sides here and see and be honest about how immature we actually are, and then let's talk about ways of growing into that kind of wholeness, growing into that kind of maturity, because the world needs us to it, and our families need us and our friends need us to be on the path of maturing, and that takes a lot of humility and sometimes a little little help. So
Yeah.
um, anyway, I don't. It's not a full rundown of a retreat, but it gives you some at least a flavor of some of the things that I like to do.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in light of that, I think one of the authors that we probably admire is someone like James Hollis, you know,
Totally.
kind of that
Yeah.
Jungian analyst. I don't know if you've ever read his book on masculinity, Under Saturn's Shadow.
No, I haven't. It's funny because that's like the one book I haven't read of his, and I it's because I don't
You should
have
read
it.
it. Okay. Oh,
Okay.
really?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I mean, well, if you felt comfortable afterwards sending me your address, I'll buy it for
Okay.
you.
Sure.
Okay. Well, because man, and maybe we could discuss it if you were open to that. I think it's my favorite, or at least one of my favorite books on masculinity, especially from kind of a depth psychological approach. I
Yeah.
won't say too much about it, but it's damn good. It's like classic Hollis, and
Mm.
I think you'll resonate with it.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for that. I love all of his stuff. I've listened to a ton of whatever he's put out. I just haven't read that book. It's funny.
Oh man. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Well, that's great. I found something you haven't
All right.
read. Now, okay. So, in light of depth psychology, that is one question I wanted to ask you: is
Mhm.
can you talk about how you got into that, and then kind of what it means to you, and then how you kind of utilize it? I mean, you've already kind of explored some of that with your work with men. I know that's a very broad question, but I'm eager to just know, yeah, how you found out about like Jung and depth psychology, and how,
Yeah.
how how it ends up kind of like shaping you.
Huh. Um, hmm. How did I get into Jung? Joseph Campbell. That's how I got into him.
Okay.
I started reading Joseph Campbell, and I started. Well, I just noticed how many times he refers to Jung, and I think he got a lot of his ideas about the collective field and the way the way the mythology lives in the collective field from Jung. I think that's a
Absolutely.
yeah. So I think that's how I got into it. Um, and then once I was, and then I found I discovered Bill Plotkin. I'm leaving out a bunch of gaps here, but I
Sure.
discovered Bill Plotkin, and he's a depth psychologist, and so I did my first wilderness oriented program with him, and then I really got into it. I did a full year-long immersion. Then shortly after that, then I applied to be in um, what's called the Soul Apprenticeship and Initiation Program. It's the guide training program. That's what we call it, but it's not really. It's not like you it's not a guide training program since you go through it and then you're a guide. It's just a soul apprenticeship and an initiation program. That's what
Got
they
you.
dangle in front of you, which is an odd thing to dangle. But once I was into his books and also into the practices and taking a harder look at my own psyche, and eventually I got a Jungian analyst myself. I just was like full in, and I just started reading. My first Jung, I bought like Carl Jung the Reader or something like that, which was edited by Joseph Campbell. So I just started. There's something about the way that he weaves in and out of um, both technical psychology, which of course was like a brand new field at the time,
Sure.
and myths, poems, and stories. And I was like, yeah, this is my guy for one reason or another. He just like this works for me. And so my I don't know, my conception of depth psychology, that would be an interesting. I mean, I kind of would want to ask you, what do you mean by depth psychology? Uh and and th- I don't even know if there's a common definition, but
Right.
I think that here's a very simple way what I would put it, that if the ego is just the tip of an iceberg of our consciousness, there's something below.
Mm,
And there's something below in the personal field. Like there's something about my own personal unconscious that is unconscious that I don't know about. And then just beneath that is a whole collective realm
mm,
that's also unconscious, that shapes and informs and sometimes wants something, and is the birth giver of dreams and mysteries and musings, um, and that's so being into depth psychology is, in a way, I think, is a way of being sensitive to that possibility. That's the way I would put it.
I
Being
like
sensitive.
it.
Yeah. So,
I ended up working with I think I think he still is this, but my therapist was at the time the director of the Jung Center in Houston,
oh
where
yeah,
James
yeah. Okay.
where James Hollis
That's right.
was for many years, and so he was very close to Hollis and was kind of mentored by him. And I don't know if Hollis has written this, but he would always tell me that Hollis would tell him
Mm,
that one of the ways he kind of would think about like depth psychology was just reminding people that I may get it a little wrong, but the way I'm kind of remembering it is, that our ego and our consciousness is like a thin wafer in the midst of a giant, sea of unconscious activity.
exactly. Exactly. Yep.
And
Exactly.
that I'll be honest, that's scary as fuck,
It
but
is.
also like exciting and liberating and complex. And so I love it.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. I feel the same way about it. It is scary because it's like, well, I don't know what's down there. It's like if we're on the thin wafer on the surface of the ocean, what happens if I fall off the wafer? Well, that's that's why
Yeah.
people go into
Yeah.
therapy.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah. And you don't and but also it's kind of it's affirming. It's like well, I got this from Jung. Jung said he was writing a sort of letter to analysts, you know, probably before they were called analysts, but sort of like suggestions. And so one of the things he said was, don't forget the person in front of you is not a statistic.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And he said, they're a mystery. They're a mystery to
Mm.
themselves and to you. And see, and I think depth psychology, good depth psychology, stays close to that truth because especially in a kind of scientific, clinical, um, environment, modern environment, we want to boil things down to biology, hormones, chemicals, statistics,
Oh yeah.
numbers, um, diagnoses. You got to get to the diagnoses. You can build the insurance company, and Jung just says, okay, fine, but the person in front of you is not a statistic. They're not any of those things at the same time. It's the same thing about God. Like as soon as you say this is God, you have to say, well, it's also not God. Well, same with a human being. If we say, oh, you're an ENFP on the Myers-Briggs, but you also have to say, and also you're not, and
Yeah.
also
Oh
sometimes
yeah.
you fall into the ocean and none of that stuff matters, So anyway.
Oh yeah, I love that, man. Okay,
Mm.
I just want to check in. Are we okay on time? Because I have maybe like two other questions that I wanted to
Yeah,
ask
yeah.
you. Okay,
I don't have any pressing commitments. Yeah,
okay,
thank you.
okay. Yeah, 100%. So one is, just kind of building on the depth psychology thing is just dreams,
Mm,
right? I'm just curious, do you end up working with your own dreams, with other people's dreams? Is that something that's energizing for you?
totally. Yeah. In fact, I would say dreams is are the thing. wait. I would say one dream upended
Mm,
my life. I mean, that's where it started. And I'll tell you exactly what happened.
okay, thank you.
I well, I started reading Bill Plotkin, and I think I was just starting to read Jung, and just before that, when I was more interested in Judaism, maybe 5, 10 years before that, I read Freud's interpretation of dreams. But I read it
Mm,
because I was trying to be cool, really, and I didn't understand any of it. I was like, I don't
sure.
know. I mean, to be honest, like I have no
Yeah.
idea what's in that book. And and I would have said at the time, I don't really remember my dreams. So I'm like in my 30s and I feel that I'm in a kind of existential crisis. It has to do with the church and my vocation and my sense of calling. And I'm just like, I'm disoriented. I know
Mm,
that I'm disoriented, but I don't really know what to do about it. And so I signed up for a Plotkin program, and this was in New Mexico somewhere, and 9,000 feet, and I was just like following the rules, so to speak. They say, hey, when you go to sleep tonight, if you have any dreams, write them down. I thought, well, I don't have any dreams. If I do, I'll write them down. So that's what I did. I wrote it down, and then in the morning, one of the guides said, anybody have any dreams? And I was like, yeah, well, I had some. And so I literally looked at my piece of paper and tried to pick the one that would be like the least interesting.
sure.
I don't know. I was like, well, I don't want to I don't want it to be too weird, even though it's kind of a weird dream. But and I just started telling it, and the way I've learned to work with dreams, and also the way my dream was being worked with, was to go into the dream,
Mm,
and to let it have an effect on you. So I'm closing my eyes and I'm deepening into the dream, and all of a sudden I realized, to my surprise, that the dream was alive, and it wanted something, and I wasn't in control. That's like the strangest thing about dreams. Like I dream this, but also I don't know who these characters are, and what's going on, and what do they want, and what effect are they having on me. And um anyway, when I open my eyes, and during the course of retelling this dream, I'm like crying and I'm like remembering things, and I don't even know what's happening. And when I opened my eyes, I thought, whatever this is, I want to say yes to, even though it scares me. Like I was
Mhm.
afraid. I was like genuinely afraid of even having another dream. I was like, well, what are these other ones, you know? So,
Right.
but that was just like, it cracked a door open for me. And then, yeah, then I started recording my dreams and getting some help with dreams. And a lot of my analysis was dream work. And then in the course of my training, now I have training in dream work, and it's a big part of what I do. Yeah, I work with people's dreams. I don't interpret them. Like they're other people. I don't know. There's all kinds of opinions about dreams,
So
but it's
many
not.
out there. Yeah.
Yeah, the what I found to be most effective personally, and also working with people, is not making too many assumptions and trusting the dream itself. That's what Jung said, and just going into it and letting it do its work. And
Absolutely. I
so,
like
yeah.
one of my favorite like Jung's students, the American psychologist James Hillman. He always talks about sticking with the image.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know, that's really important, I think. So
Yeah, exactly.
if you
Mhm.
don't mind, real quick, I'll just share. Man, I won't get into all the details, but you know, my journey starting therapy. There's a dream that actually, believe it or not, has some type of connection with you. But I was sitting in the therapy, just completely destroyed. I had just been fired from a pastorship and no money. I mean, just life was completely in shambles. And the first dream that I had, which I was terrified to talk about, was at the time I was kind of listening to like Pete Holmes and then Rob Bell, who I know you have some type of relationship
Mhm.
with. And the entire dream was them in Los Angeles inviting me to lunch and then just putting their arms around me around a circular table, which, you know, as a Jungian
Mm.
had some type of significance, I would find out. And they just said, it's going to be okay.
Mm.
You'll,
Yeah.
you'll, you'll, you'll figure it out. And that was it.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I didn't know what the fuck it meant, but it turned out to be a quite powerful dream and very hopeful. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they can be like that. And it does require a certain amount of faith that there's a wisdom here. There's a hidden
Mm,
wisdom in the psyche. You could even say in the spirit. That'd be the old way of saying it, you know.
sure.
But there's a hidden wisdom that is seeking, well, sometimes a kind of confirmation or consolation, like you're saying, like, hey, you're going in the right direction. And sometimes also wants to pull the rug out from underneath who we think we are. Both of those being in service to some kind of growth, some sort of, I mean, that in the simplest sense, that's what growth is. It's like we come to the limits and of who we think we are, and then there's
Mm,
a crack, and we have to venture out further. And dreams, more often than not, are providing the right kind of crack.
mm,
And what's beautiful about them is that one of the things I love working with dreams is that I have no idea what someone's about to say, and they have no idea. It's not like they went to sleep and said, "Hey, I want a good sex dream tonight," guys, whatever. And you just,
right.
more oftentimes they're like disappointed. I had a whole series of dreams where I was like obsessed with this one public figure that I don't really know, and I kept going to these parties, and I would even like, and I kind of wanted to be in the party, but I was also kind of mocking it. But I was actually annoyed with myself. Like,
Mm.
why will not, I want to have a different dream. But sometimes they're just relentless. It's like, until I turn some attention to what this represents in my psyche and what it wants, then it's going to keep coming back,
Oh yeah, yeah, man.
So,
One of the refrains my therapist would always use is whether he was talking about this, the psyche in general, just dreams, is that they're autonomous. You know, you want to
yeah,
control them.
yeah.
You want to be able to
Autonomous is
like.
a good word. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I hate that. And really,
Yeah.
you know, people love talking about like shadow work and stuff, and I'm all behind that. But really, when you start to wrestle with these dreams, are pointing out things in you, around you, that you haven't really reckoned with or integrated. That to me is where the real work is done and where it gets kind of scary because
Yep.
by definition you can't fully integrate it yet, and you have to kind of wrestle with that. and,
Yeah.
and that's not sexy in my
No.
opinion. That's
Yeah.
difficult shit.
It is. Yeah. It's more of a, and maybe you could even exaggerate a little bit and say you'll never integrate it. If
I,
it's
I
really
I would say
shadowy
that for
material.
sure,
Yeah.
100%.
Not fully. But like, Robert Bly says that, he has this great image of the shadow. He's like, we spend the first half of our life stuffing many things into this long black bag that we drag behind us.
Mm,
And then if we're lucky and kind of unlucky at the same time, we spend the rest of our life taking stuff out of that bag of darkness. But then he says, but all we can do is take one bite at a time. And
mm.
that to me, I think he knows what he's talking about, because you can't go to a weekend retreat on the shadow and be like, I've integrated my dark side. It's like, you may not even be anywhere near the train. You may not even have dipped your hand into the black bag. You just may have like
Mm.
admitted that you have some bad habits, and
Right.
so anyway.
So, okay, Kent, really the last question I wanted to ask was I often just like to ask kind of the guests, can you speak to maybe what you're like working on, or is there something currently that's like energizing your psyche in terms of your work that you could like maybe talk a little bit about if you're able to do that?
Yeah, I'm almost done with all my training at Animus. This is Bill Plotkin's institute.
Nice.
And I'm in a season where I'm just trying to finish that. It's been very
Okay.
slow and long and life-giving and tiring, um and but it means I'm almost done. So I don't know if I'll be a guide for Animus. I hope to
Okay.
someday, but I will soon be turning more attention to my own retreats and programs,
Mm,
and potentially some at Animus as well. So these are wilderness oriented experiences, and mine are usually 3 to 5 days, somewhere in there. Um, and I'm still leading pilgrimages to Israel. That's what I call them, pilgrimages. And I've been doing it actually for 20 years, believe it or not. This is insane.
wow.
And I still value that, as all kinds of different people come, like religious, non-religious people on the fence, come on
Sure.
my trips. But I really like to take people to that part of the world. Um, and I have been working on another book, but
Mm,
I just can't really say. I think I've written like 3 books in the last few years, and each time I've been like, no, not I'm not quite ready yet.
got you.
I don't know. It's right. I have podcasts, and I like making podcasts and teaching, and they come quite more easily. But there's something about writing that is like, it's a slog in a good way,
Mm,
and it's like more permanent than a podcast. It's like,
mm.
if you were to ask me every single question that you just asked me, like in the last 40 minutes, I probably have a different answer, but so at least a slightly different answer. But
Dude,
with writing,
totally.
it's like, all right, I'm trying to craft something. So anyway, so I don't know, writing, retreats, my podcast, and my big move. This is kind of what's on my plate right now. Yep.
Mm, yeah. Well, Ken, I mean, globally speaking, I just appreciate you as a human being and what you produce. I am especially grateful for you right now and just the time and everything that you've shared. Would you mind kind of just ending by saying the line of this podcast, which is just continue the conversation, which just kind of captures my heart and what I want these episodes to be about?
Not only will I say that, this is something that is close to my own heart. I mean,
Mm,
what else is psycho spiritual work than continuing the conversation? So, what's the phrase exactly? Continue
yeah,
the conversation? Yeah,
continue the conversation.
continue the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, man.